trying out something new today. I'm going live on my author page today instead of on my public profile, and to see what kind of reaction I get from going live on my page as opposed to my profile. Just doing a bit of an experiment, I guess. So, what I want to talk about today, I'm taking part in this really cool podcast challenge. So I've been thinking about podcasting for a while, and during this Christmas, as you see, we're still celebrating, even for Russian Orthodox, it's way past time. I got it's actually been the best Christmas I've had in a very long time. My wife knew exactly what to get me. Yes, I suggested certain things to her, it's true, but other things, within the suggestions, she managed to make some pretty wonderful gifts. So I really have nothing to complain about. I'm very grateful. In particular, this baby right here, a Blue Yeti podcast microphone. It's expensive and it's gorgeous, and the sound that it records, I mean, I hate hearing the sound of my own voice on recordings. I sound nasal and obnoxious. Finally, this microphone actually makes me sound like a human being. It's just wonderful. I've been thinking about doing podcasting for a while. Format's an issue. I've been listening to different kinds of podcasts, not really sure. I have a lot of things I'd like to say, sure, but I'm not entirely sure what the best format would be, what would be most interesting to people. So I thought I would take this podcast challenge, which forces you to get sort of butt in chair and actually do things. So the assignment for today is to record your first podcast episode. So I'm doing it from my author page because I'm actually thinking of doing a podcast as part of my author outreach online. And I thought I would talk about this, something I've been thinking a lot about. You probably have read or have watched the Last Kingdom series on BBC. That's now also being shown on Netflix. Now, if you've been following me at all, you know that I love that series. I think it's a fantastic series. The production values are very good. And by and large, for the most part, as far as I can tell, outside of some clear preference for the pagan characters at the expense of the Christian ones, it's a pretty even-keeled show, I thought. There was one scene in one of the episodes in season 1 that I really didn't like. This was a scene of I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was a Christian ruler of some kind, possibly even in the show, I think it may have been a clergyman, who makes a big deal when the Vikings enter a church. He makes a big deal of Saint Sebastian, and the icon of whom is hanging on the church. Saint Sebastian, for those of you who don't know, was killed by being shot at with arrows. So he's showing the icon of Saint Sebastian and saying, "Look at the power of our God. Our God was able to preserve this man from being killed by arrows." And then the Vikings then go on to say in the show, well, then what happened later? And did he end up escaping from death? And the Christian says, no, he was actually beheaded ultimately. So the Vikings don't understand the point of the story, and the story plays kind of ridiculously, and ultimately in the show they force the character to reenact the role of Saint Sebastian, and if his God will save him, then they will immediately convert to the Christian faith. Okay, now it was a weird scene. I didn't like it particularly because, well, for obvious reasons, but I actually started reading The Last Kingdom, the first book in the series, which is now up to book 9, I think, or I started to listen to it on audiobook. And that scene plays a little bit differently in the book. It's actually King Edmund the Martyr. Now, King Edmund the Martyr is a canonized saint in both the Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. So immediately the scene has a little bit of a different feel to it, because Bernard Cornwell really portrays Edmund as an obnoxious, unpleasant guy who is at a disadvantage because he's about to get he's unable to fight off these marauding armies of Vikings, and he is holding court in his church. Well, I think it may be a hall, and he's trying to insist that the Vikings all become Christian before they even begin peace talks. Now, and he comes off at a great disadvantage because he's obviously not in any position to talk about conversion because they're about to destroy his army. So he comes off as petulant, as kind of annoying, and he makes this point about Saint Sebastian's icon, and when the I think it's not Ubba but Ivar the Boneless or something, I forgot his name, but he's an actual historical Viking, curious to see the power of this god, in all sincerity then says, look, if you want us to convert to Christianity, strip and we will shoot arrows at you, right? So just like the show, except slightly different because it's King Edmund, not some random priest. And all of a sudden Edmund, again, who is a martyr in both churches, becomes afraid, very obviously, and tries to slink his way out of the situation by suggesting, okay, well, we won't insist on you getting baptized. We can just talk peace now. And then Ivar goes, no, you've insisted that your God is more powerful than our gods, so I want to see it in person. And predictably, Bernard Cornwall not being a Christian, the end of said King Edmund is rather pathetic. He gets shot up with arrows, and the whole scene is played for laughs, and it's actually quite horrific. We are expected to sympathize with the Vikings in this book because everything is being explained or narrated from the point of view of a young boy who himself sympathizes with the Vikings, even though he's an Anglo-Saxon. But anyway, the way that this scene played out, it didn't sit right with me, not simply because I don't like scenes where martyrs are being made fun of, but because something about that scene in a historical novel, which historical novelists are very careful about being historically accurate, usually. A lot of times historical fiction readers go out of their way to check up on the historical veracity of the events, and if somebody messes things up, then they'll actually take the author to task. So it's not like fantasy where you can just take a historical motif and kind of go crazy with it. No, they have to be pretty accurate. So I was curious, and I went and looked at the actual history and what we know about King Edmund and his martyrdom. And it turns out we don't know very much at all. What we do know is that he was almost universally admitted to be a very brave man, and his army being defeated, he actually seems to have this is not a historical source. It's his hagiography, which is of limited historical value. He offers to basically sacrifice himself for the sake of his people. So he that's one of the versions. Another version basically has the Vikings kill him in a fit of rage because he refuses to deny Christ, and they're very clearly on a sort of crusade, on a pagan crusade against Christianity. Christianity being the effeminate religion of those who are not warriors. But in any case, what I took away from from what we know historically about King Edmund is that the character of King Edmund is nothing at all like this rather effeminate, rather pathetic character that we see in Bernard Cornwall's book. Not only that, but this setup where a character in 9th century England belligerently tries to convert a whole bunch of Vikings for no real reason other than it's important for them to be part of the church or something, and then ultimately to be afraid of showing his desire to die for Christ. This is actually a very weird and very modern insertion. Now, what do I mean? If you're an honest historian, you have to take, at least partially, the points of view of people from that time period, or rather their worldview and their opinions of the world, at least somewhat seriously. And if you read any primary sources from that time period, you will be astounded by the amount of faith people had, in God's, this is Christians I'm talking about specifically, in God's actual, very physical, active involvement in everyday life. They, even if King Edmund was going to die like Saint Sebastian, even if he expected fully to be martyred, he would never have paled or become afraid at the opportunity to show his bravery in the face of these pagans. So something is missing. Something is missing here in this portrayal of Christians, and it gets even worse later on when effectively Bernard Cornwell starts to describe situations completely ahistorically of monks and nuns actually raping children in retaliation for the violence that the Vikings are perpetrating on the English. Now, there is no evidence of this ever happening. It's extremely unlikely, in particular because if we consider the English Christian mission, the first missionaries to England were sent by St. Gregory the Great. And St. Gregory the Great, as I was recently reading in a new book that's about to be published called Age of Paradise, a very interesting book about the sort of rise of Christendom in the West and the fall of it after throughout history from the time of Christ. There was a really St. Gregory had a very non-confrontational and culturally sensitive approach to conversion. He told his missionaries that they had to speak to the people in the language that they're used to, that they had to incorporate the pagan symbols that they were used to and transform their meanings into new Christianized meanings. This is, for those of you who know, not surprising. This is the way mission has always worked in the Christian world, particularly in the early centuries in the medieval times, when the really successful missionaries, rather than destroying the shrines and the religious objects of the pagans, although that did happen in some cases, in England it did not. What they ended up doing is taking the existing religious structure and reinfusing it with new meaning, with the Christian meaning. So this is where the whole Arthur legend comes, where you have Merlin as a representative of the old gods, peacefully kind of walking into the background, and the magic that surrounds him fading with the coming of the new Christian God. It's not so much a confrontational thing; it's a kind of end of one age and beginning of another. It's also very interestingly captured in the poem Beowulf, where the writer, who is clearly a Christian monk, is writing with a degree of nostalgia and wistfulness about the pagan past of England, because he recognizes that there was a lot of beauty in there that could and was used culturally within the new religion of Christianity. So this is a very different reality. The historical reality is very different from the one portrayed by Bernard Cornwell. Now, why am I talking about this? Because what's interesting is that along with this sort of weird twisting of history against the Christian witness, what ends up happening with a lot of these authors, including Bernard Cornwell, and this is something you see in season 3 of the last Kingdom. There is a denigration of Christianity and a kind of assumption that the Christian God is either effeminate or absent, while at the same time there is a clear preference and a clear suggestion that the power of the Norse gods, of the pagan gods, is real. And you see this very vividly in season 3, which is all about Skade, a seer, and her manipulating all the men around her and trying to basically control events in England to get herself in as prime a spot to grab power. But in a very vivid moment, she's imprisoned by Ragnar, who is the adopted brother of Uhtred, the main character in the series, and Brida, who is sort of the adopted sister of Uhtred, brings an object. I forgot what it's called, but basically it's a ram's head chopped off, stuck on a stick, and she thrusts it in front of Skade's cell door, and immediately Skade loses her powers. She's unable to control anyone anymore. She's unable, and it's clearly suggested in the show. Now, I haven't read the book, so I'm not sure how the author treats this, but generally the books skew pretty close to the show skews pretty close to the book. It's very clear that the possibility of the Norse gods having actual, if they don't exist, at least there being some sort of power there, exists. Now, this, you see it again and again and again in historical literature, and in particular in fantasy literature. I see it very often. For example, The Bear and the Nightingale, a wonderful fantasy set in Russia in the 15th century, I think. I haven't read it in a while. I'm about to start book 2. I wrote a review of it. You can find it on my website on nicholaskotar.com. It's a book that I do recommend, except that the the setting, although in highly Orthodox medieval Russia, seems to discount the reality or agency of the Christian God. He seems to be largely absent. And the only active participants on the supernatural level are the chirtsi, which they're actually called that. The chirtsi, the author uses the word, which means devils. And she uses the word to indicate all of the mythological creatures that are associated with Russian mythology, all the way from the hearth spirit, the Mavoy, all the way to Bear, who is an old Slavic god of winter. And rather idiosyncratically, she uses the character of Morozka, who's just a fairy tale version of Santa Claus, as a kind of lord of winter, but a counterpart to the evil god of winter, who's the bear. All of these characters have great powers. There are mermaids, there are vampires, there are all kinds of magical creatures, all of whom have magic and do all kinds of things. But the only real interaction we see with the Christian God is through the eyes of a mad monk who is clearly in delusion. Like he thinks he sees visions of the divine, and very soon in the middle of the book, it's made clear that actually what he's seeing is the chirtsi dressing up in images of light, so pretending to be angels and the Mother of God and Christ Himself, and that's where it's left. So you have this tremendously rich time period of medieval Russia, which was, if you've read the novel Loris by Evgeny Vodolaskin, you will know that in that time period, people were just obsessed with religion, and they saw the agency of God in every single thing that happened to them. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine how much they were obsessed with the presence of God in their everyday lives. If that's the time period you're choosing to write about, then why are you not at least suggesting the possibility that, especially if you're going to give agency and power to the chirtsi, to the demons, to the mythological creatures, why are you not at least allowing the possibility that the Christian God can have agency of his own? He's completely absent. In fact, one of the characters even suggests that there is no such thing as a creator God. And this character is a character who is in the know, which makes for a very weird mythology and cosmology, because then where did the chirtsi come from? Are they just powers of the earth? Is it all just materialism anyway? But if it is, then why do you even have the mythological element? It makes for weird reading. And in general, it also goes along very much with a modern kind of resurgence of Neopaganism. We've seen a resurgence of worship of the Norse gods in Iceland. There have been actual services to Odin in Iceland. On social media, if you know where to look, there are people who identify themselves with the Norse, with the followers of the Norse gods, and spend most of their time talking about how great Valhalla is and how pathetic Christians are. Why am I talking about this? Well, what is interesting, or what kind of bothers me, is that it would seem to be more interesting to consider, like, if we're supposed to, as writers, if we're told as writers that we need to give the bad guys as much motivation, character motivation, as much sort of life as possible, then why is it too much to expect authors to at least consider in their fantasies the possibility that there be this battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness, and let the Christian mythos at least have some sort of chance? I don't know, it kind of bothers me. But what I will say is that there was one book that I read recently that managed to incorporate the world of the Christians in Russia, of medieval Russia, and the world of the pagans in medieval Russia into a unified story that was nuanced, very subtle, very interesting, and ultimately I found myself moved by the ending of it. And I would recommend this book to anybody who was interested. And it's not even a novel. It's a graphic novel. It's called The Green Monk. Now this is the author here is Brandon Dayton. He's a guy who has won several awards for some of his illustrations and comics, and he published recently, I think within the last year, basically I think it's a sequel to an earlier graphic novel called also The Green Monk. So this one's called Green Monk: The Blood of the Martyrs. It's like part 2, and it's a very interesting story. It explores basically the setting is a monastery in medieval Russia. The monks are perfectly normal characters who do not have the usual vices that seem to be given to all monastic or clerical characters in modern popular culture. They're not all lusting after women or children. They're not all money grubbing. They're not all trying to control you all the time. They're not all woman haters. In fact, they're just monks who are worried about their own salvation. And a woman comes into this monastery carrying a bundle that turns out to be a child, and she's almost dead. She's walked through tremendous cold, and basically her hands and legs are frostbitten. She's she's on the verge of death. And she begs with her last breath that the monks take the boy in and raise him. And she gives the suggestion that there's some sort of evil that's hanging over him that they need to protect him from. And the main monk does. He says, we promise that we will raise him as a holy man. The boy is raised in the monastery. He's very restless. He has violent tendencies. He tends to get in fights, but usually these fights are to protect the innocent, so not just random fights. But he does have a very violent temperament and a lot of strength, physical strength to him. And then in a very interesting moment, he starts getting these visions of a goddess, who is clearly Mother Earth in the Russian sense. She's dressed in medieval Russian clothing. He calls her Holy Mother, and he seems to know her. And he goes through this. He has this vision, which seems to have a physical component. So he goes through these ordeals, and he comes before her, and she keeps giving him these temptations, and they come in threes, interestingly enough, which is, the 3 is a very Christian, a number with Christian symbolism. And she gives him these temptations of power, of different things, and he keeps saying, no, I must be a holy man, no, I must be a monk. This is a comic book, a graphic novel. It's wonderful. And eventually she leaves him with no choice, and she says, you have to choose a weapon with which to defend the innocent. And he says, I'm a holy man, I cannot, so I choose this blade of grass. And she says, so be it, let it be as you choose. And he wakes up, and he has the sword that's basically a huge blade of grass, but the size of a sword, and extremely sharp, and has magical properties and stuff like this. It's a magical sword, so it has all these great fantasy elements to it. And when he comes to, he realizes that the monastery is being attacked by effectively what looks like the Mongols, some sort of nomadic tribe. And he goes and he defends the monks, ends up killing almost all of the bad guys. And I'll leave it there because I don't want to ruin the ending for you. But the ending is not at all what you think. It's very moving, and he doesn't reject. Well, I'm not going to say anymore. All right, you just have to read it. It's a very interesting, very, very good book. Now, why am I so interested in this book, in particular with reference to Bernard Cornwell and his depiction of Christianity in the medieval times, is that this is a very good example of somebody not taking a side, not taking the Christian side, not taking the pagan side, just depicting a historically accurate picture. I'm not telling the ending, Sue, sorry. I won't tell the ending. He's just depicting the reality in Russia, where a lot of people were still pagan, even if they were officially baptized. They still had affinities to their pagan past. And that pagan reality was not simply something made up. It was something probably with power to it. Otherwise, why would people believe in it? And that seems to be the suggestion that Brandon is giving it. Without again, it's a graphic novel, so there isn't a lot of subtext. You fill in the blanks on your own. But the monks are people. They're not caricatures. The main character, the young boy, is a person. He's not a caricature. He's got a complex character journey that he has to go through. And in the end, he kind of embraces both his pagan past and his Christian future. Again, I'm not giving away the end. It's a very moving end, which gives, by the way, it's kind of a cliffhanger. Well, sort of. It's an unresolved end that suggests there might be more books coming in the best tradition of any comic book. But ultimately, it's a message of hope that doesn't preach. And this is what I talk about a lot. The best kinds of books are willing to consider the power and the mystery of different points of view, even those that you don't agree with. And ultimately, what really bothered me about The Last Kingdom, the book, is, and this happens also in Wolf Hall, by the way, which is a series of historical novels about the time of Henry VIII. There seems to be more and more a kind of acceptance that you need not give any credence to historical Christianity, that it's okay to treat it as you would a modern Christian that you don't like. And what ends up happening is a bunch of caricatures and a poverty of storytelling. So ultimately, even though I like the Last Kingdom series, the television series, what I like about it ultimately is at the end, when Alfred is finally given a chance to be not a stupid jerk, but to actually be a human being with failings, but who is willing to transcend those failings and to consider the humanity of the person opposed to him, even though that person is a pagan. And that pagan, Uhtred, can look at Alfred and see in him a human being who's worthy of respect and maybe even love. And that is beautiful. And that's the kind of thing we don't have enough of, by the way, in our daily interactions with other people. And certainly, we will not get anywhere nearer to understanding the points of view of other people, or any farther out of the quagmire of the political nonsense and the ideological wars that we're going through, until we learn to see the human being on the other side of the aisle. Especially when that person embodies everything you hate. Because that person is still a human being. Anyway, so the challenge, the podcast challenge that I was talking about in the beginning, told us to do a 1 or 2 minute long podcast episode. This is clearly not a 1 or 2 minute long podcast episode, but I'm attempting a new format and a new idea for my author podcast. I'm going to try different things over the next few weeks with different books, different formats. I'm going to try a more freeform and a more structured version. You let me know what you think. Those of you who are watching, I'm also going to post this on YouTube and on my regular author page on Facebook. And I'm also going to post this as a blog post on my website. So let me know if you like what you liked about the different options. Today's going to be the more freeform. Next week, we're probably going to have something a little more structured. But I'd like to hear your feedback. In any case, those of you who have been watching know that I was talking about Circe 2 weeks ago. I hadn't finished it yet, and I had my doubts about it. But I will tell you now, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit next week, but that it's a very good book, worth reading, even if the end isn't quite as good as it could be. So there's your little teaser for the next time. Let's talk about Circe and mythology and Greek gods and all that sort of fun stuff. In the meantime, stick around and watch out for more episodes of what might effectively become a podcast on my author page. And again, like I said, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody.